All right, people, here we go. Episode 4 of the Optimistic Fan Club podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If it's your first time, you haven't missed much because we haven't done many of these. Maybe you just watched the Browns video from this week and you're hopping on for the first time. So thank you for tuning in. Today, we're going to jump into a bunch of topics. If you're here just for the Browns, I've added timestamps and everything. You can click to the end. But first, we're going to start off with Brandon Staley after that outstanding showing on Thursday Night Football last night. Then we're also going to touch on Mike Tomlin versus Bill Belichik, a little bit of a debate that I want to throw out there for you people. Then we're going to touch on the Bills making a playoff push, and then as I mentioned, talking Browns, Bears, all that good stuff. So first off, a lot of people like to argue that Justin Herbert is not good. He's the social media quarterback. He's carried by outstanding performances from his receiving group. He doesn't win enough games, so he shouldn't be mentioned in the same breath as Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen. I've always been a Justin Herbert admirer. Big time. I thought that the way the ball comes out of his hand, he throws that thing like a javelin. There's something different about the way he plays. You can see it. He has the clutch bone in his body. And a couple weeks ago when that photo was circling around Twitter talking about, I forget exactly what the points were, but essentially the Chargers have scored X amount of points on offense since Justin Herbert has been a Charger. And their defense has literally given up one less point than that total amount, which goes to show you, and what we saw last night, Herbert was carrying this team completely. A lot of the times in my videos, I like to talk about how player execution is the number one thing. Coaching is largely just getting your guys in the position to succeed. And I don't think that that could be proven more than what we saw yesterday. Staley has not been a good coach since he blew that game against the Raiders to go to the playoffs. Herbert carried that team the entire game, made a couple unbelievable plays on 4th and longs, marches down the field, scores to win, or not to win, sorry, but to get the game back and tied. The game literally could have ended in a tie. It would have been fine. The Raiders and the Chargers both would have made the playoffs. Staley calls an untimely and unneeded timeout. The Raiders get a little ticked off. They go for blood. They win the game. They get knocked out. Then last year, if that wasn't enough of a fireable offense, then you go to the next year. They make the playoffs. They have the 28-point lead, whatever it was. It was over 20 points, so it's inexcusable. And they blow it. The defense completely folds. The offense starts to sputter, but still, they scored over 25 points. They scored 28 points. That should have been enough right then and there, but the Charger, they blow it, and they get knocked out in the first round against a younger quarterback with a first-year coach. Staley had the advantage in that game other than not having home field, but he had a better roster. The Jaguars the year before were under Urban Meyer. And within 1 year, Doug Peterson comes in with a younger quarterback and completely outduels you. Actually, I don't know if they're younger. Lawrence and Herbert might be just about the same age, or I forget exactly. Remember, we're doing this live, people. So don't have all that information on me. But the point remains, Staley should have been fired after that Jaguars loss last year. And they threw this season away because how do you expect a leopard to change his spots? You can't go from one season to the next and say, oh, Brandon Staley will get it under control and will stop losing in dramatic fashion every single week, where every game is a 3-point game, and we're just going to pray that Justin Herbert can pull another miraculous play out of the bag to go in and win. And last night, you could see the way Antonio Pierce coached that game when he came out at halftime or after halftime, and he said, we're going to put our foot on the gas pedal and play harder. That's the message to the team. Antonio Pierce is a guy who played the game at the highest level in the NFL, worked his way up the coaching staff, got an opportunity because Mark Davis saw that the players believed in him when they had that big meltdown meeting in the Raiders where they were having an open conversation with Josh McDaniels, which was openly reported. Antonio Pierce got in front of the team, talked about how when he was on the Giants, they went in and nobody thought that the Giants could beat the Patriots. We know what happens. Giants shocked the world. McDaniels was put off by that, which is hilarious, and reportedly said, don't ever talk bad about the Patriots, which is so funny. But essentially, Antonio Pierce earned his way up, and he's making the most of his opportunity now. I'm sure, and I tweeted this last night, you can follow me at Joey Riccatoni, I'll link it below, on Twitter, lots of tweets on game days. I tweeted that you can tell how much Antonio Pierce does not respect Brandon Staley. He's a guy who was largely given his position because he coached the Rams defense the year they won the Super Bowl, but I mean, you have Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. Those two guys on their own are enough to win you a couple games and just carry a coach regardless of the play calls. He also had a fantastic offense on the other end, and Sean McVay, who's a much better head coach who can manage a game properly and doesn't make the same bonehead mistakes that Staley does. So I think Antonio Pierce was looking at Staley saying, I'm going to put a nail in this guy's coffin tonight. Not only are they divisional rivals, but I don't respect the fact that he's had so much leniency coaching this team and doing a mediocre job, and who's obviously been carried by his generationally talented quarterback. I'm going to expose him on national television, and boy, did he ever. The Chargers completely quit on Staley. This reminds me of the last Hugh Jackson game in Cleveland, where the team was just done. Like, there was no more fight in the unit whatsoever. They fully had just passed things off and said, like, we need change. We don't believe in you. We're not going to fight for you. And Brandon Staley predicted this himself. There was a press conference a couple months back or a couple weeks back where after a loss, he was being asked by a reporter, like, do you think that this team still believes in you, essentially? And Staley goes out and he goes, absolutely. We would have got blown out of the stadium if that was the case. And that hasn't happened yet. So this team still believes. And there, you got your answer right there. You got blown out of the stadium by an interim head coach starting Aiden O'Connell and a team that scored 3 points last week or no points last week. I don't even remember. That's how bad that Minnesota and Raiders game was. It doesn't even matter. At most, they scored 3 points. That's it. And you have to fire him today. You have to move on. There's no point in working out the rest of the season. Throw someone in there. If you think that Kellen Moore is the answer, or you at least want to give him a try, give him the last 4 games, because there's no use in having a guy that everyone clearly dislikes in the building. You don't give up on a coach like that if you believe in your coach, because you have respect for them and you understand that your performance is tied to their job security. So just with all that being said, I think quickly shifting this, or actually transitioning to the next topic, a great quarterback can carry a coach. They can pull them very far, because at the end of the day, if you're winning, it doesn't really matter. You're not going to make the changes if you're still winning, because you don't want to mess with that formula. Winning is hard enough in the NFL. So sometimes coaches can be carried by their quarterback. And now let's talk about Bill Belichik. Everyone loves to talk about Belichick's a horrible coach, and without Brady, he's nothing. He was clearly the definition of the Patriot way. All of that rhetoric. And there's definitely truth to it, without a doubt. Without a doubt, Tom Brady is the greatest player of all time. He carried a lot of mediocrity in terms of the weapons that he had throughout some of his career, in terms of poor offensive performances for much of the game, and then he can string together drives. We have to remember, though, Bill Belichick was operating that defense at an extremely high level. Even this year, They have multiple games where they've held an opponent to 10 points or less, but the offense just can't do anything. So Belichick isn't a bad coach. He's a great defensive coach. He's not a great GM. He's not a fantastic offensive mind. He doesn't really touch too much of that, and that's where Brady carried things. But he can hold his water on the defensive side of the ball. So you can't deny that fact. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, for a lack of a better term. With Staley, though, the defense has never been very good. It gives up a ton of chunk plays, and every game comes down to the wire, and Herbert saves you. So that is a bad coach. Belichick isn't a bad coach. Staley is. Similarly, Kevin Stefanski, if we're just going to mention the Browns really quick, Stefanski does so much with scraps, with all of the injuries, with 4 different quarterbacks this season. He's won with all of them. That is a good coach. He's still putting his players in the position to succeed, and he's coached his players up enough where they can execute as well. Andrew Berry's also built a roster of guys who can execute and step up when someone goes down. And we're going to save the Browns talk till the end, but I wanted to talk about Bill Belichick here because, again, like I mentioned, we're always talking Belichick, Belichick, Belichick. He's nothing without Brady. And I'm wondering, what about Mike Tomlin? Mike Tomlin hasn't done much without Ben Roethlisberger, also one of the great quarterbacks of the era that a lot of guys my age grew up watching. He had a ton of success, and Mike Tomlin largely inherited a great team. If you're too young to remember this, the Steelers won a Super Bowl with Bill Cowher, and then Mike Tomlin came in a couple years later, inherited this team, and then won the Super Bowl 3 years later, I believe. And we don't talk about that too much. I respect Mike Tomlin a ton. I think he's a fantastic motivator. I think that he's a big culture builder. But again, without a figurehead, a stable leader on the offensive side of the ball in the form of a great quarterback, he hasn't done much. He hasn't won any playoff games without Roethlisberger. He hasn't been to the playoffs without Roethlisberger, at least. And this is something we often forget. After Tom Brady left New England, the second season, the first one was the Cam Newton one. The next year they drafted Mac Jones. Mac Jones wins the job. They went to the playoffs that year. Yes, they got blown out in the wild card, but they did that with Mac Jones. Remember the guy who everyone hates on, who everyone says is the worst quarterback in the league? Belichick coached that team. He's had some modicum of success since Brady left. And Mike Tomlin, since Roethlisberger left, nothing. Now, I understand that it's different time periods. It's only been 2 years since Roethlisberger left, and that's been Mike Tomlin's quarterback situation. It's only been 2 years. Belichick has had about 4 since then. So let's look at 63 games without their top quarterbacks. And again, like I mentioned, since it's only been 2 seasons since the Steelers haven't had Roethlisberger, this includes some games where Roethlisberger was on the roster but was just injured and couldn't play. So he still has the benefit of Roethlisberger being on the sideline. Then 63 games, and this is all since 2020 without Brady. So this is the post-Brady era where Brady hasn't been in the building. So Mike Tomlin without Big Ben, 33, 29, and 1. Belichick since 2020, which was the first year without Brady, 28 and 35. It's not that different. And like I mentioned, with the Tomlin stat, that includes seasons where Roethlisberger was on the roster, but he was injured. With Belichick, that's all with Tom Brady being completely gone and having to rejuvenate and retool the identity of this team. So I just thought that was interesting that we look at the Steeler way, the Steeler culture, and then everyone wants to throw out the Patriot way and the Patriot culture. They've still performed at some levels, and they made the playoffs once since Brady left. Mike Tomlin has not done anything since Ben Roethlisberger left. And that, again, is not to discount him as a coach, but it is to say that you can't discount Belichick as a coach. He has blind spots, but At least he calls a great defense. And there is some transferable things where if Belichick goes to a new team and he gets partnered up with an actual GM who's going to make the calls, or at least work side by side with Belichick so he can't waste draft picks year in and year out, he'll find success. I think Mike Tomlin will as well. But we have a little bit of a bias, I think, because Belichick is so old and because the greatness of the peak of the Patriot dynasty was so much greater than the Steelers. The Steelers haven't won a playoff game since 2016. The last time they won a Super Bowl was 2008. You know, the Patriots won 6 throughout that time. They had 2 separate dynasties. So I think that fall from grace, that fall from the elite level is so much more stark compared to Tomlin, because Tomlin has been consistent and Belichick has been outstanding and then now extremely mediocre. I understand also Mike Tomlin has never had a season where they're a 3-win team, but Mike Tomlin and his Steelers just lost to that team when they had 2 wins, and the week before when the Cardinals only had 2 wins. So it's very interesting how we like to paint these narratives and say Belichick is washed, he's old, Patriot way doesn't exist, it was always Tom Brady, but we don't do the same with Mike Tomlin. We look at Tomlin as this amazing motivator who is kind of a victim of circumstance, but let's call it what it is. He doesn't have an elite quarterback. He hasn't been winning as much. He hasn't had as much success. So something to consider. Also, even with the last couple of years of Ben's career, I understand he's not Tom Brady, but they didn't have a win. They didn't have a playoff win since 2016. They severely underachieved with how great those rosters were. Those Steelers teams in the early to mid 2010s, Big Ben, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, those 3 guys, the 3 Bs on their own, were just unreal. It's a big shame. So just something to consider when you're in your Twitter wars with people or you're making your decisions on Belichick's legitimacy. So something to chew on. Okay, now let's jump over to a team who is clawing and fighting their way back after a big bombshell story dropped last week. We talked about it. We talked about the Sean McDermott article. If you want to hear more about that, that's in episode 3, last episode. It's all on a playlist. And guys, just remember, if you want to listen to this on audio, if you don't want to have your phone open and playing, you can follow this podcast on Spotify, obviously linked below, so you can go do that. But let's get back to it. So the Bills win a big game in Kansas City. The Chiefs have a hissy fit. Mahomes freaking out. Whatever. He's just upset. He admitted he was wrong. Let's move on from that. Nothing really to look at there. Kadarius Toney just has to stop doing bonehead things. But regardless, the Bills go in. They win this game. They are very much alive. And now they have a game against the Dallas Cowboys, who are red hot. However, I really like the Bills in this game. I think a lot of people really like the Bills in this game. Cowboys might be at the top of the market. They've been on a real heater, but they are coming to Buffalo and going to have to play outside. Who knows? Could be a windy game. It's definitely going to be cooler and overcast. I think that Buffalo is the hungrier team right now, and everything is kind of coming up their way. They win that dramatic game. Then the Dolphins lose a stunner where they had a 99% win probability against the Titans. Now the Bills just have to win 2 games, essentially. They have the Cowboys, the Chargers, the Patriots, and the Dolphins left in the year. They're 7-6 right now. Then the Dolphins are 9-4. They play the Jets, the Cowboys, the Ravens, and the Bills. They're walking into a buzzsaw because this Jets game, not going to be easy. We've seen the Jets defense is pretty good, and if Zach Wilson can have 25% of what he had last week, it's going to be a barn burner. Like, it's going to be a tough game. This is not a gimme whatsoever. They're starting to get banged up. Dolphins lose their starting center. Tyreek Hill's hurt. It's not looking good for them right now, and this is something that I previewed earlier in the year, and I built my predictions for the Dolphins based on the idea that I thought Tua was more likely to miss a couple games than not. However, the pieces around him that are most important to him are starting to drop like flies. So that could lead to a game where he's under pressure a lot. Tua isn't fantastic under pressure. He's not super mobile for being a smaller guy. So the Bills, this is kind of their season to lose now. If they win out, they get to that last week and they have 10 wins. They can grab an 11th against the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins have a very good chance of losing the Cowboys and Ravens. I mean, definitely the Ravens. And it's going to come down to the last game of the season. We could be looking at the Bills winning the AFC East. It looked like they were down and out. That article comes out last week slandering McDermott, which, again, looking back on it, that Tyler Dunne guy, it was definitely a very interesting piece of reporting, but you have to understand that was released and he had some reason to be upset with the Bills organization. They took away his company or his publication's credentials from being able to be in the facilities and having press credentials to speak with the team, interview players and whatnot. So there was a reason why he released that report. It doesn't mean that it's not true, but it was framed in a way of it was coming from a person who had been personally wronged in some way. So with all of that said, if McDermott can get this team rolling and they make another playoff push, who knows? They win a couple games. If they make it to an AFC championship, all that Tyler Dunne stuff, he kind of took a shot and didn't swing for the fences enough. So it'd be interesting to see what will happen with that. I mean, if they went to a Super Bowl, that would be hilarious too, just specifically for this guy releasing that report. And then the team rallies behind McDermott. Allen goes on a heater. The defense starts performing again and they won it all. That would be one of the funniest scenarios ever, because then you have a guy who essentially went for the kill, didn't finish the job, and is now a bit of a laughingstock looking from the outside in. But that's a lot of what if, so we'll have to see what happens there. But I think the Bills are very legit. My brother is a huge Bills fan. He's been a Bills fan his whole life. I'm obviously a big Browns fan. My dad is. My little brother is. But we always talk after the Bills and the Browns and whatever. And I was saying to him that the Bills are very much alive as long as they have Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. They will keep you in games. It's the same thing with Justin Herbert. It doesn't really matter how bad the head coach is. You could still do something. You could still make a playoff push as long as you have your guy and you have just enough defensive stability to get your team the ball back late in the game and allow them to be able to do something. However, I know that we're saying this based on the fact that the only reason the Bills didn't lose that game is because Kadarius Toney was, standing in Kansas way offside. So we'll have to see. But that's the reality of the game. A lot of it is just weird happenstance. And, we paint winners and champions with a broad brush saying they played so great, but we ignore the balls that bounce their way, the calls that go their way. But in the end, we just look at who's standing last. So it'll be interesting to see. But I got the Bills -1.5 this week. If you want to jump on that train, it's too late. The line has already moved to 2.5. But I really think that the Bills are going to step up, and I wouldn't put it past them to win this division. And finally, let's jump to Browns Bears for this week. This is obviously coming from a Browns fan. We have the moniker of the optimistic Cleveland fan club, optimistic fan club in general, but optimistic Cleveland fan club, you have to understand that just because you're optimistic doesn't mean you're not realistic. You have to be realistic to be an optimist, or else that's just blind faith. And blind faith doesn't work in football. There's too many variables. So currently, the Bears are the wise guys' favorite in Vegas right now. A lot of people are looking at the Bears and saying, they've been pretty good the past 4 games. The defense is a lot better than people really understand. I think, two, being more AFC consumers, if you're that way, you might not be super aware of how great this Bears defense is starting to be under Matt Eberflus, but currently the Bears are 6th in estimated points. EPA, I always forget the expected points allowed. I always mess up that, what's the thing? Not monogram. Whatever that thing is where you have the letter of each word and the letter says something. Somebody comment that down below. I'm blanking right now. But expected points allowed per play. The Bears are 6th, and this is defensively. Right now, the Browns are 25th, and that's all since week 9. So the Browns defense has been on a steady decline since that time. And it's all related to all of these injuries that have been happening. We've seen it. Delpit on IR, out for the season. Maurice Hurst, IR, out for the season. Denzel Ward has missed a lot of time. Juan Thornhill's out. Rodney McLeod is out for the year. And now they're still mulling over Obo Okoronkwo. That still hasn't been decided. But in general, a lot of core pieces going down. A lot of young guys being asked to step up. But just to say, this Browns defense is on a steady decline. This Bears is on an ascension right now. So this is a stout defense. Don't let the 5-8 record fool you. They are a lot better than people understand. Chicago's coming in hungry. They understand what's going on. Matt Eberflus is fighting for his job next year. Justin Fields is auditioning every week for a new team. If the Bears wind up taking Caleb Williams, he wants to put tape out there that he is the guy. I'm sure he wants to win out and maybe even make a playoff push. They still have a chance to make the playoffs in the NFC. So if he did that, it might make the Bears think twice about who they're going to draft next year. So just to say, they're coming in very, very, very hungry with less weight on their shoulders. Because at the end of the day, if they lose and they're out of the playoffs, they lose and they're out of the playoffs. Life will still go on there. But for Cleveland, a ton to lose. 8-5, atop of the wild card race in the AFC. You lose this one, a couple teams win, things become a lot dicier. So there's pressure on them. Also, we're coming off the tail of Joe Flacco having a great game, but how long can that really last? We saw with the Jets last year, he played pretty good the first 3 weeks, then a steady decline. So maybe that's due to some of the offensive coaching from the Jets last year. Hopefully Stefanski can keep things going and he can incrementally improve, but seeing 300 plus passing yards and 3 touchdowns, I don't know how realistic that's going to be. Also, like we mentioned, the Bears' run defense, very good. Browns' run offense has not been good whatsoever. Injuries at tackle. Don't have Nick Chubb. This is going to have to create a lot of things that Browns fans don't like Stefanski getting cute. You are not going to be able to run the ball between the tackles 30 times, impose your will, and just drop back and pick apart this defense. Jalen Johnson is a very, very good corner. He's a very good defensive back for Chicago. So you have to understand, it's not going to be easy. And Stefanski's going to have to get very creative to create some splash plays. So don't be on Twitter lighting it up saying, oh, Stefanski's getting too cute. We just got to keep it simple. We got to run the ball. We got to do this. We got to do that. We played the Jaguars. The Browns played the Jaguars last week. It was a bad defense. Banged up defense. Not good. They picked it apart. They were in an environment that they're not used to. This is a team from Florida coming to Cleveland. This is Chicago coming to Cleveland. It's the same thing, essentially. They're a similar team, and they just happen to have less injuries as a whole right now than this team does. So there's going to be chances for miscommunication, false starts like we saw last week with James Hudson and Jaron Christian. And people want to get upset and say, oh, you got to get those guys out of the game. There's no other option right now. So you're walking into a game with a good defense, with nothing to lose but a lot to win, a very dynamic young quarterback who's a fantastic runner and can throw the ball at times, and a great receiver in DJ Moore. So now let's talk about some matchups and injuries and whatnot. So Denzel Ward was limited in practice all week. I'm filming this early on a Friday, so not sure what the final designation will be, but it seems like Ward is going to play. And that's not based on anything other than the fact that he did practice, even though it was limited, but just the injuries in the secondary. I think this is one where he's just going to gut up and say, look, like, we have to have this win. I'm going to take a chance and play here. Because Juan Thornhill didn't practice with that calf injury. It's looking like he is going to miss another one because he tweaked that calf again. And let's jump into the actual injury report here. Okay, so Bitonio, Amari Cooper, that was all rest related, but you have Jordan Elliott, concussion, hasn't practiced, seems like he'll probably miss this one. Jerome Ford, wrist, limited practice, he'll play. Then Myles Garrett, you have the shoulder still, he's playing. Kareem Hunt, groin injury, did not practice, and then limited practice, so he'll probably play. Then Obo, still trying to make a decision on that. Then Ethan Posich, hasn't practiced this week. Very concerning, because that means Nick Harris is going to have to play center. We can't use him at fullback, which has been a big secret weapon in the power running game. Then Juan Thornhill, as we mentioned, hasn't practiced. Anthony Walker, he's in, but on the injury report, more so rest related. Denzel Ward, like we mentioned, limited practice. You should expect him to be out there. Then on the Bears side, you have Jaquan Brisker. Did not practice on Thursday, did practice on Wednesday, so it seems like it's getting worse with a groin injury. Potentially he doesn't play. Dylan Cole, linebacker, personal, didn't practice full practice. DJ Moore, ankle, didn't practice limited practice. He'll be out there. Equimania St. Brown, hasn't practiced this week. Mercedes Lewis, tight end, didn't practice Thursday. And then Noah Sewell, linebacker, knee, limited practice Thursday. I'm not going to sit here and act like I know every single guy that we listed off there. I know the main guys, the key guys. Essentially, Chicago is coming in relatively at full strength relative to Cleveland. So, not a ton of advantages there. Cleveland is behind the 8 ball right now. This is a trap game that on paper you look and you say that, oh, they should win this. It's the Bears. They're 5-8. We're 8-5. You have to look at the performances over the last couple weeks. As we mentioned before, Chicago's defense is playing very aggressive. Since they got Montez Sweat, they've been seriously improving. They're creating a lot of turnovers. They're stopping the run. They're forcing teams to drop back and pick them apart. And this is where we're going to get answers on Joe Flacco. If he's really, really, really the savior that people want him to be. You know, people want Joe Flacco to be the successor to Deshaun Watson. They're looking at him and they see the story and they go, oh, this is amazing. Cleveland loves an underdog, right? And they're saying, wouldn't it be amazing if Joe Flacco was the guy and we started him and he just led us to the promised land? It's a great thought. It would be an amazing story. But sometimes the other shoe's got to drop. Look at Josh Dobbs. All of the outrage that Cleveland fans had, he moves on to Arizona, has some success there, beats the Cowboys, then winds up getting demoted, third string, put on waivers, Minnesota trades for him, comes in with a couple days notice, has an amazing game, wins the next week, and then slowly starts to decline as teams begin to figure him out. And now he's the third stringer again. And that is why some of these guys get traded or they don't get picked up. There's a reason why Joe Flacco's sitting on the couch and was available to be picked up. And part of his success has been Stefanski being willing to adapt, let him run plays that he's comfortable with, and Flacco's just natural ability as a thrower. Then guys doing good things with the ball in their hands, like Njoku last week, but also scheme, as we mentioned, where Stefanski's giving him open shots down the field. But again, that's against a bad defense. So are those open shots going to be there against the Bears? It's going to be a lot less likely. So you're going to have a 38-year-old quarterback who the city loves, but we might start to see the reality of who he is. And again, I know this is the optimistic Cleveland fan club at this time right now in this segment of this podcast, but we have to be realistic in our expectations. If he comes in and throws for 300 plus yards again, multiple touchdowns, no turnovers, that would be outstanding. And it would be a real marker of like, okay, Flacco is in his groove. He feels comfortable in this team. Maybe he really could make a serious playoff push. This is a defining moment because when Vegas is against you, when all the wise guys are on the other team, that's a better indicator of the outcome of a game than any sportscaster or analyst can really give you. Those are the guys who win money betting on these games. They understand the limitations that certain conditions and roster moves affect a guy. Flacco could prove everyone wrong, but personally, I think that he will have his struggles this game, and it will come down to, can the Browns defense create enough turnovers themselves? Can they keep DJ Moore in a box with Denzel Ward covering him all game? Can they sack Justin Fields? Can they get home? Can these D tackles, can Siaki Ika come in and pick right back off where Maurice Hurst left off? We're going to have to see about that because it's a lot of unanswered. You're starting guys who have had very limited starting experience or haven't played at all in some cases. So that's not to scare people or anything whatsoever. It's just to say that there's unknown in this game, and a lot of questions will be answered this week. If you go in, you shock Vegas meaning the gamblers, not the Vegas Raiders. If you go in and shock Vegas, you take down the Bears, you circumnavigate their great defense with Joe Flacco and light it up once again, that is a major light at the end of the tunnel of what has been an insanely difficult season. So a lot to look forward to in this game. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I got something in the throat. It's dry in here. But a lot to look forward to in this game, a lot to be concerned about. But when it comes down to the play calling, you have to understand that Stefanski has to think outside of the box now. Just doing the things that Joe Flacco, just doing the things that Joe Flacco is comfortable with is not going to work anymore because teams have seen it now for 2 weeks. They're going to start to adjust. This is usually when backup quarterbacks start to see a bit of a decline in their productivity and the greatness that everyone hopes can be sustained forever. Minnesota Vikings fans and NFL fans were watching it in those first couple games saying, Dobbs, what a great story. People are buying the jerseys. Now he's sitting on the bench. So the same could happen with Flacco, or he could shock the world. This could be the greatest sports story that we've seen in years if he makes some sort of playoff run. But this game will answer a lot. Got to hope that Ward can play and shut down DJ Moore. But also guys like Cole Kmet. There's something like these linebackers are going to have to shut this guy down because Chicago has answers. They have a dynamic quarterback. Their defense is solid. They have nothing to lose, everything to gain. The Browns have to come through as a favorite and once again step out of the shadows of all of these injuries and prove everyone wrong. So it'll be interesting to see. And I'd love to know your guys' opinions of what's going to happen in the comments with all of the games that we mentioned. Let me know what you think of the Mike Tomlin, Bill Belichik argument. If there's a lot of Cleveland fans, I'm sure you'll eat that up. But it'll be very cool to see. And if you've watched this far, I'm going to put out an audio only instant reaction to the Browns Bears games Sunday night. So you have to subscribe to the podcast feed, which is linked below to be able to get access to that. I won't put it up on YouTube because I just don't want a static image sitting on YouTube. That will be a Spotify and podcast release only. So check that out on that day if you want to hear that. It won't ruin anything for the Wednesday, Thursday recaps that we do. But regardless, thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, tell a friend. Really looking to build this up. And like I mentioned in last video, we're going to be doing this podcast all throughout the offseason, talking general NFL and always making time for the brownies. So finally, if you want to buy some stickers to support the channel, let me grab them real quick. Got some plastic wrap on them right now, but got these guys and we got the big bumper stickers. These are available online right now. Link also below in the description. Really helps us support the channel. Currently trying to save up and get a better camera for the podcasting. You can probably tell in the Browns recap, the camera quality is very, very high because shoot that on a better camera. However, it has a 29-minute recording limit, so can't do the long form podcast. Want to do that, want to reinvest all of this back in to deliver you guys the best quality stuff and just to be able to dedicate more time to this. So everything you guys can do to share, like, comment, buy some fun stickers, it's a major help. So thank you guys so much for listening. Go Brownies. Go Optimistic Fan Club for all NFL viewers, and we'll see you in the next one.